We know that young people are normally on social media, so that's where we need to sort of capture their attention.
Yeah.
It can be difficult to get through all the hurdles and changing letters and changing names of sexual terminology, just so
Especially
that you're not
when it's really unrealistic to expect people to train to become content creators overnight or in their personal time,
Right.
when they have other things to do with their lives. All the TikTok stuff I've had to do, I've done in my personal time, and I had lockdown.
and they're wearing like knickers that are not like up in their bottom, and do you know what I mean? Because that is uncomfortable, like,
Right?
you know.
Give me a granny pan any
Right,
day.
you know.
It is not necessarily social media's fault that these things are happening. You can blame platforms all you want. If you do not prioritize and resource sex education, do not be surprised when your adolescents and your adults are opened up to sexual risk.
Yeah.
That is what will happen because they haven't been protected.
So I think for me, it's teaching young people and people in general to actively and proactively follow other influencers, people on Instagram or on other social media platforms that are promoting body positivity and sex positivity. Like
Yeah.
that is key.
Hello and welcome to Coming on Top, a podcast that dives deep into the world of sex, love, dating, relationships, and we also touch on the worlds of tech and culture. Each episode, we'll be tackling a different topic, looking at the highs, the lows, and everything in between. All those hard questions that you've always wanted to ask but were too afraid, we'll be answering them on this podcast. In today's episode, we'll be discussing the impact that social media has had on sex and relationships over the past decade or so. And joining me in conversation are two sex experts who, between them, have shared their expertise on the likes of Vice and Married at First Sight. It's Charlene Douglas and Sophia Smith-Gaylor. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you.
Hi. Thank you for coming in.
Good to be here.
Ladies, tell us a little bit more about what you do. I'll start with you, Charlene.
Okay, so my name's Charlene Douglas. As you said, I'm on Married at First Sight, UK. I feel like I have to say the UK part.
Right.
So I'm a psychosexual therapist. I work with individuals and couples, helping them with sex and relationship issues, basically. And any other platform that I can find to talk about sex and relationships, I'll use that too.
Great, fantastic. And Sophia?
I'm a journalist. I cover everything from sexual and reproductive rights to health to tech. I've also written a book, Losing It, all about debunking sex myths, kind of with a journalistic, investigative slant. And I'm a TikTok content creator on top of that as well.
Oh, I could do with with some advice from you with TikTok. Fantastic. So before we kick things off, let's of course start with my sex fact of the week. Did you know that in a 2020 survey of British teens, 17% of those aged 15 and over had admitted to sending a nude or sexual photo of themselves? What do you make of this number? So 17%.
Had done it, and they'd possibly done it earlier than age. What was the age?
So age 15 and over.
Well, obviously that's illegal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what do we think of the numbers? So 17% have claimed that, yeah, I've shared nudes and sent content of myself. Do we think that's higher or lower than expected?
I would suspect that it's higher.
Right.
I think that, I don't know if people want to admit to sending nudes of themselves,
Right.
but I would suspect that it is higher. I think having worked in secondary schools and the kind of conversations that I've had to have with young people about things like this, I think a lot of young people think there's nothing wrong with it.
Yeah.
And that they will just do it.
Yeah, I'll agree. I think there's an element of, and especially when you're younger, you're less likely to, there's a bit more shame attached to things like sending nudes. So I think that number could be a little bit higher. I'm not sure everyone's telling the truth there.
No.
And now it's on to the mass debate. And today we're talking about the effects that social media has had on sex and relationships. Has it had a positive impact or a negative one? Or, like most things on social media, is there a murky grey area? So, ladies, how does social media provide sex education for a digital age? I'll start with you, Sophia.
It can come in many ways because it can come from many sources. So I can think of a number of charities or organisations that really care about young people that obviously very early on pivoted to supplying that information where young people are, which is social media. That is where increasingly young people are getting their news and any kind of informative content. On the other hand, you have lots of people making content who don't necessarily come from a background where they are held to rigorous standards like research or even basic ethical truth telling, and will be using social media platforms to share things that they perhaps shouldn't be. So it is a real mix of, on the one hand, we have more information at our fingertips than ever before.
Right.
And we can, especially if some creators are able to bypass the traditional gatekeepers of media to give us the information we need about sex and our bodies, that's brilliant. But on the other hand, there is also a great deal of misinformation out there. And this is not only, if we think very broadly of the internet, misinformation and disinformation around sex is not only very present in English, it's probably even more present in languages beyond English, where we know social media platforms do not have a good track record for full-bodied moderation teams in all these languages.
And what do you think the dangers are of unqualified sort of sexperts, quote unquote, giving out advice on social media? Because there is a lot of that, isn't it? It's like your favorite influencer, you might follow them for one thing, and then they might talk about their sex life and give out advice. What do you think the dangers of that are?
Oh, it's very dangerous. I mean, you know, when you think about, you know, some of the advice that's out there around sex, some people are not trained in things like the impact of trauma on sex and sexuality. And so when you're giving advice to people, you have to really be careful. You know, it can be a life or death situation that you're playing around with. In saying that, I don't necessarily say that you have to, you know, have a psychosexual qualification to teach about sex, but I think you need to make sure that you have researched it enough, because you have a responsibility, if you're sharing that kind of information with people, to make sure that information is accurate.
Do you find that now with social media, and like you said, Sophia, is that's where a lot of young people are getting that information? Do we think that young people are going to social media for like advice around sex, dating, intimacy than they normally would with their parents or guardians?
We know that parents do not talk to the young people in their care, or anyone with a young person in their care, in the way that they should about sex. We know there are so many studies from numerous countries around the world that tell us that parents do not regularly speak to young people about sex. Sometimes, if you're lucky, you may get the talk, but there isn't necessarily there isn't necessarily much ongoing conversation around sex that seizes upon teachable moments based on content that might be, you know, it might be you're watching an episode of EastEnders that happens to have something quite interesting in it, and that's a moment for a parent to say, oh, that was interesting.
Like a
wasn't it?
teachable moment, yeah.
Can I just say though, I think that the parent has to be comfortable talking about sex. And I think for a lot of adults, they haven't done the work on themselves to feel comfortable talking about sex. And so it's like then super awkward when they're speaking to their child. So I'd often talk about when I was younger, you know, my parents would see like two people kissing on Home and Away, like daytime TV, and you just felt the energy was shifting. And they'd like my mum, and I, you know, love her dearly, bless her, she would turn the TV over and it'd be like, they're just kissing, it's daytime TV. And I don't know if things have changed that much today. I think people are still really uncomfortable.
Massively.
When it comes to anything linked to sex.
And do you think things like that, so when you are watching, because I think we can all relate to that awkward, you're watching TV with your mum and dad, something awkward comes on, everyone makes the excuse to dash to the toilet, suddenly you want a cup of tea. Do you think like that sort of plants a seed for young people as they're getting older, that there's shame attached to talk about sex and intimacy, and then it's harder for them to then open up to their parents or guardians?
Yeah, it starts even early on. So like when you're a young child and you're, you know, like touching yourself and trying to explore, now there can be a conversation that's had around that's healthier, where you say to a child, you know, that maybe needs to be done in private. But there's a lot of like shame attached to things like that.
Don't do that.
Why are you doing that? So automatically the child, there's this like internalized message that this is wrong. Like, oh my gosh, it's like shame. Yeah, I need to cover up. I need to be careful. Now, there's something about teaching children how to have privacy, you know, when it comes to sex. But I think instead it gets mixed up with shame. I think that's what we have to be careful about. And then that continues oftentimes, like as they head into their teen years and their adult life. That shame, they're sort of swimming in shame.
Yeah. And how do you think young people can sort of, and like you said, Sophia, because you're not only big on TikTok, but you actually teach other people how to sort of, you know, build their profiles. Is that correct?
No.
No?
No, I leave them to
just me, because we were talking about this off air. I was like, Sophia, I need to have a chat with you after the show. So how would you advise young people to sort of, because you know social media, there's just all sorts going on. How can young people decipher the true advice from sort of accounts they should stay away from? What are the sort of signs that they should be looking out for?
I like to see transparency and qualification. So, for example, I don't go on social media saying I'm a doctor or medical anything. I say that I am a journalist who specialises in this area, and I have gone to the effort of getting accreditation to deliver relationships and sex education.
Yeah.
So I will say that, but obviously, when I talk about certain elements of different kinds of content, I will say, oh, I looked at this when I did my book, and I interviewed this psychosexual therapist, and this is what they said.
Right.
So I always try and make the sourcing clear for where I've got my information from.
Right.
So for me, that's transparency. You said responsibility earlier. It's such an important word because I feel a responsibility to have rigorously researched content out there. That's how I build trust with my audiences, and that's how I give them the best information and give myself the best information. The other piece of advice I would give is that it's really helpful seeing what the interests of the content creator are. Is the piece of content that you're watching associated with a brand partnership that they have? Is this a brand you can trust? Is it a brand that you've never heard of? Is it a brand that may have suspect reviews about it online? We are all capable of doing research for ourselves as well. So those are some of the things that I look out for.
Yeah.
But I always make sure that the information that I get about sex is kind of a well-nourished diet of information. And I look at that as an adult. So for a young person, you're hoping they get their parents, their teachers, and healthcare professionals that they meet. You sort of hope it's that. And there'll be bits of social media in that because of their general consumption. For us, we're no longer in educational settings.
Right.
We are even more reliant, to be honest, on the internet and healthcare professionals as adults, because we lose those kind of teachable links with parents and educational settings that we had as young people. So this information being good online, we often talk about it, oh, young people this, young people that. It's about us as well. We can be a victim of misinformation when we finish recording.
Absolutely. And I think we often say, oh, young people, but it's across the board when you look at, the effects of social media, particularly on sex, relationships, dating, and it affects us all, but so much so for younger generation, at least if you're over a certain age, let's say you grew up without Instagram or Facebook or whatever, you can at least look at social media from a different perspective and see it for what it is.
Right.
But a lot of young people are born into, they don't know life without social media. This is all they know. And so speaking again about responsibility and accountability, do you think social media is doing enough to protect young people from sexual content online?
I think they're doing their best. Some platforms are
Right.
doing their best. I think the problem with it, though, is that it feels like there's like a blanket ban around sex.
Right.
And what makes that really tricky is that when you're like a sex educator, like how do you get that information out to young people, let's say? So of course we know, like if you're in this industry, you know that there are websites that you can go to with like healthy information, but we know that young people are normally on social media, so that's where we need to sort of capture their attention.
Yeah.
It can be difficult to get through all the hurdles and changing letters and changing names of sexual terminology, just so that you're not
Especially
banned.
when we're trying to sort of convey the message that actually these are normal body
Right.
parts and organs and you should be
Yeah.
calling them the right. And then you go on social media and try to educate people and then they ban your post because they
Yeah.
think it's sexual content.
Yeah.
So it's like they need to sort of, it's like help us here out a little bit, guys.
Yeah.
Like they need to also help us because it is educational. And I think it's making that distinction, isn't it?
And on the other hand, you have people like us who get infuriated by efforts to sort of seemingly perhaps suppress content or claim it's violated a community guideline when it hasn't because it's educational. On the other hand, you have instances like just before Christmas, I did a story about how within 3 or 4 days, a video was being amplified on the TikTok For You page of deepfake pornography of Billie Eilish that had used artificial intelligence to adapt photographs of her. This was a time on TikTok when AI art was massive. Everyone was talking about the Lensa app and getting sort of AI art pictures of themselves via the app. There was another AI trend going viral at the time. TikTok was just in the mood for amplifying AI because there was so much interest in it. And somehow those images of Billie Eilish got mixed up in the sort of the melee of war, and they came up, and reporting within the app didn't work. Nothing happened to these images, and nothing happened nothing happened to these images, and then you as the journalist, you go to the platform and you say this has happened, and suddenly the video disappears and it violated our guidelines. So in one instance, it sometimes feels like the moderation is overactive and is active where it should not be, and it's not doing it enough to platform reliable, informed, researched information about our health. That is what sex education is. Health information. It's really important health information. And then on the other hand, it's amplifying stuff that it really shouldn't be and will be causing harm to individuals.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And do you think who's more responsible for how, young people, their activity on social media? Do you think it should be the social media companies, or should parents and guardians actually be taking responsibility for their children and what they get up to online?
So my response is probably going to be controversial, because I do feel like it's a responsibility of the parents.
Agreed.
I think that parents have said to me, because you're not a parent, that's probably why you're able to say that. But I think that I know that obviously parents are really busy, and that social media, like children can access, or young people can access it in their bedrooms, on their phones, etc. But there are ways to manage that, to make sure that your young person isn't on there for so long, or that you can see what they're looking at. So if they're typing in certain words, you think, oh, okay, they want to know more about oral sex, let's say, and let's have a conversation about it. I just think that sometimes it's easier for people, I won't say parents, because I'll get in trouble, people to say blame social media, but actually, like, who's giving young people the access to that? Like,
I mean, the thing is, in an ideal world, that would be the reality of life, is that not all young people have parents, guardians who even care about that. That some parents would just let their children do whatever online, and so we are missing out on a massive percentage of young people who simply don't have a responsible adult that would do all of that. So how can social media sort of do a better job at protecting young people? Because I do agree with you, Charlene, in that, it should start at home, and we shouldn't just depend on teachers at school or social media companies to teach certain things to our young people, our young children, and it should. But in times where you don't have that person, that adult to sort of guide you, and you are sort of left with social media, what can social media put in place, do we think, to protect young people who may not have that in place?
I would like to see, and this is based on research that Google did, this was around combating misinformation around COVID-19. And they found out that if they used the YouTube ad space to create content that would pre-bunk myths and misinformation around COVID-19 and provide information around it, users were more likely to essentially be inoculated against misinformation around the pandemic. And when I read that piece of research, I thought, amazing, let's use that for more stuff across health. And obviously, I have a vested interest in sexual and reproductive health. I would love to see more content like that there. Now, social media companies, those ad spaces are where they make their money. So this does involve buy-in from them. I would like to see more amplifying of information and social media content from trusted content creators in this space. So if we're thinking of sex, you've got sex educators, you've got psychosexual therapists, you've got nurses, you've got lots of people who are very well qualified. Some of them will be very able content creators themselves. Some of them will need some help. So provide them with some of it. It's really unrealistic to expect people to train to become content creators overnight or in their personal time when they have other things to do with their lives. All the TikTok stuff I've had to do, I've done in my personal time, and I had lockdowns really to help me with a lot of that as well. And I have a journalistic background, so I knew how to shoot film and stuff. But not everyone has that, and we need to bridge some of those gaps. I also think teachers and parents deserve spaces to educate and feel better resourced and confident about talking about the online world. I still think there's a huge digital divide. If we're talking about parental monitoring, which there needs to be, I actually read a piece of research that was done in the 2010s, and it was about teens SMSing. So it's from that era of and I was once a teen that SMS and sent and texted boys, right? And a different era of the internet, but they found that they did identify that teens who were sort of sending more than 100 texts in a given time period were more at risk of sexual risks, and that parental monitoring was a way to minimize those sexual risks. I wonder how eloquent and articulate parents at that time were with texting and talking about texting, and even just knowing who the kid's texting. Now we're in an era where, do you know how TikTok works and the content? Can you talk to your teen about TikToks you like and TikTok content creators you like? Can you talk about the Discord server you're having loads of fun on at the minute, and then your teen tells you about the fun they're having on their Discord server, rather than it being like parents and children speaking two different languages. Right. I think that's part of bridging the sort of information gap as well.
Yeah, no, I agree. And Charlie, I'm going to throw this question at you because I know you do lots of couple therapy.
Yes.
Have you seen sort of an increase in couples coming in facing problems that are sort of directly or indirectly related to social media?
I think maybe more indirectly. I think, social media and mass media in itself, it's quite subtle, the messages oftentimes that's passed on to us. And I think a lot of the couples that I work with, there are a lot of myths that I have to debunk around sex. And oftentimes I'll just say something very basic to the couples I work with. And I'll say, what do you want to do? But what does it for you? And it's just like, oh yeah, like, this isn't about what I should be doing and shouldn't be doing. It's more like, what works for you. Right. But there's so many messages that come through around sex and what we should be doing and shouldn't be doing, and what we should be enjoying, and et cetera, that even for us as adults, like it can become quite overwhelming. Yeah. And you spoke a little bit earlier about not just sex, but like dating and relationships, and
because they're all intertwined, aren't they?
Yeah. Like if you're not careful, like I've got to do work every single day to teach myself the truth, because everywhere I look, I'm seeing lies.
Yeah. So you have to do that due diligence yourself, right?
Every day. And I enjoy it because it's what I do for a living.
And do we think social media has had a positive or negative impact on sex as a whole?
Silence.
I think both, right?
Yeah,
I want to hear your arguments for both.
Yeah.
My arguments for both are that we can learn about sexual identity and expression in a way that traditional media has deprived us of.
Yeah.
And that does not show us. And we can hear it directly from individuals. We don't need any media person or commissioner or anyone to kind of gatekeep this information from us. We can access it. We can be the voice ourselves, represent ourselves. And again, the media space is not broadly representative of, take for example, the British public and the British public's diverse sexual identities and expressions. And social media is a way to access all of that and learn about all those different things. On the other hand, we know, especially with young people, it has had an influence on sort of self-esteem and certain risk areas. But my caveat for that is always, if we haven't built people up with really solid digital literacy, that is going to happen. It is not necessarily social media's fault that these things are happening. You can blame platforms all you want. If you do not prioritize and resource sex education, do not be surprised when your adolescents and your adults are opened up to sexual risk. Yeah. That is what will happen because they haven't been protected.
Yeah. And do we think that social media breeds sort of unhealthy comparisons and unrealistic expectations? Because as much as we can say, responsibility of parents or guardians or teachers or us as experts, sometimes if you're so inundated with so many images and looking at other people's bodies and other people's lives and your colleague, and you're seeing what, somebody's career going off, or somebody's getting married or engaged, or somebody's, in a bikini and they look a certain way, does that, no matter what we do, how can we get around sort of those pressures that do affect our approach to sex and dating and love and relationships that social media automatically does, whether we like it or not, and no matter how much we try to put things in place? Do we think that social media does do that, or is it up to the individual?
I know for myself that I follow people who promote like body positivity and sex positivity. Right. But I also know there are lots of profiles out there that don't do that. And so it isn't, obviously a young person is going to sort of gear more towards, the person that looks like they have, let's say, quote unquote, perfect body. We know that
Doesn't exist,
right? But they'll move more towards that. So as you said, I do think it's a responsibility of teachers, parents, like lots of different resources to help young people to understand the truth. So they're not just thinking, okay, this is the way that it needs to be. Like, I follow people who have bodies where they have like real tummies and, and they're wearing like knickers that are not like up in their bottom. And do you know what I mean? Because that is uncomfortable. Like,
right? Give me a granny pan any day.
It's because it's comfortable and like, your vagina and your vulva can breathe. Like, so I think for me, it's teaching young people and people in general to actively and proactively follow other influencers, people on Instagram or on other social media platforms that are promoting body positivity and sex positivity. Like that is key.
And I think I have seen a lot more of pages that are just actually real people with real bodies. Yeah. So I think and it's good, I think, for young people to sort of follow the pages that make them feel good. And I always say to young people, if you're on social media and it makes you feel depressed, it makes you feel anxious or like not positive about your body, like tailor your social media. And I think sometimes, because with we spoke about Instagram off air before and, the algorithms and how, they'll show you content for people that you don't even follow. Like you might check somebody's page just for like one thing and then you keep getting inundated with this person's thing. So do you think that's something that social media can sort of remove? Because I think, if you remember back when Instagram started, you just see the people that you follow. Right. That's the only content that you see. Whereas now it's almost out of your control. Yeah. And it's like they just throw in all sorts of content at you that you're not even asking for.
Yeah. You're asking the wrong girl this, because I am of the TikTok generation. And we are departing from the social graph, which is what you've just described.
Is that what it's called? It's the social graph.
Platforms which are built on friend and follower systems, where you see the content of your friends and the content of those who you have selected to follow. Right. TikTok instead has a very powerful recommendation algorithm that now Instagram Reels, YouTube Shorts, they're all parroting each other. But now I can see content that is made by someone I've never heard of, and they may have very few followers. They may be brand new on the scene, but have something incredible to say and brilliant information to give me. And it finds me. This content finds me. The journalism that I do or the content that I make, it can go to the right person. And that happened recently. I did a story, I think this will interest both of you, but I did a story about how so many people in the UK have been denied a transvaginal ultrasound scan because they are sexually inactive, or they are sexually active but are from the LGBT community, and the healthcare professional in question has deemed them to be virgins and has called them virgins, a word that I think should be absent, frankly, in healthcare. Yeah. And I did a video, I did a TikTok saying I've done this story. And at the time I had interviewed 5 people in the UK that this had happened to. I make the TikTok about the story that I've done, goes viral everywhere I post it. Wow. And I got deluged with DMs from people all around the country saying, this happened to me, this happened to me, this happened to me. Somehow my video got in front of their eyeballs and they were like, oh my goodness, this happened to me. And that, I don't think that would have happened in OG IG. Yeah. I don't think that would have happened. Yeah. And for me, I've been able to harness it. Of course, there are plenty of times it gets on my nerves when I miss out on the content of people that I do follow. And I'm like, how did I not see that? And because it wasn't served to me, because it was busy serving me all this other recommendation stuff that I didn't actually see the content of who I've selected to follow. So it's not unproblematic, but it can really help. Yeah.
And speaking of, people, of something going viral and off the back of that, people getting in touch to say, oh, I've experienced this. We've seen an increase of people sharing their sexual abuse stories online. It's becoming more and more of a thing. Do we think that that's a good thing, or are there any dangers associated with that?
I haven't seen that, to be honest. So it's probably difficult for me to comment on that. I suppose it depends how it's done, what's been said, the work that they've done on themselves as well.
I think post Me Too movement, we're seeing a lot more women saying, and not even just women, even men as well, but mostly women, arguably we can say, just sharing their experience, whether it's a microaggression of someone touching you inappropriately in a club.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Or like, there's these kind of things,
Yeah, no, I have seen that, and I do feel like that is really powerful. I know when that Me Too movement started that it generated a lot of conversation, particularly, amongst women around the fact that we have also experienced some version of that, being in an office, comments about your top being quite low or, your dress or your hips or things like that, and that you felt uncomfortable or, you felt that you've had to be a certain way in order to, work your way up the ladder, and you just feel very uncomfortable. So I think it's really helpful and really healthy to have people that are open enough to share that kind of information. I suppose the thing is with social media, it's, as we've said, it can be used for good, and we've seen lots of examples of that. It's just when it's used in a way that is dangerous that I think that worries me.
Yeah.
And because we don't have control in terms of what is fed to us, as you just described, it just means that you can be fed information, you can be quite vulnerable, maybe quite young, and you don't know where to go to work out whether that is like correct information or incorrect information, and that worries me.
Yeah.
Something I'd add to that is that it doesn't matter how good I am on social media. It doesn't matter how well a TikTok performs in whatever week, how many followers I have. The fact that I am victim to harassment and abuse online, nothing to do with how good I am on social media. That is a reality of being a woman online.
Yeah.
And especially putting out the kind of content that we put out.
Yeah.
You can have the best intentions in the world and be like me and be very social media positive and tech positive. I also still need to be harnessed and have a solid vocabulary and resources at hand for dealing with the harms. We all need that, even with the most positive attitudes about social media in the world.
Yeah. And talking about, let's talk about sort of people in the public eye and celebrities who do have a massive influence. So I don't know if you guys remember, but Demi Lovato a little while ago came out as non-binary, and then later on retract on that and said, actually, no, I re-identify as a woman.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So, and she got a lot of backlash for that. Do you think there's a habit of celebrities, people in the public eye, sort of bandwagon jumping onto palpable topics that they think, okay, if I just, associate myself with this movement, do we think it's a good thing when celebrities come out, as non-binary or come out as part of the LGBT community or anything else really? Because sometimes it does feel like a lot of people, like, for example, queer baiting is quite a big thing, and especially a lot of female celebrities have been accused of queer baiting and pretending like they're sexually fluid but not really. So what do we think the dangers of that are when celebrities come out as something and then backtrack on it?
How do we know that they're pretending though?
Well, so with Demi Lovato, she came out saying, I'm non-binary, I don't identify either fully as a woman or fully as a man. And then she backtracked and said, oh no, actually, I re-identify as a woman.
But that sounds to me like someone having very normal, a normal questioning of their
identity.
Gender, and they are in the public eye. So it ends up being reported on, because if they're being honest about their lives with their fans and with reporters, that will be reported on.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I have a lot of sympathy with anyone in the public eye who's questioning anything, whether it's their gender identity or their sexuality. And people who aren't in the public eye get to do that in private. They get to do that. Often they'll only give trusted individuals in their lives that information, and hopefully it's all done in quite a nice way. So I think that's really tough. I would also say that I think audiences now are very critical and pretty savvy. I think if someone was saying something that appeared to be misleading or appeared to even be sort of promoting harm or sort of not treating a certain group in the way that they should be treated, I think people could spot that.
Yeah.
But I think they're two different issues. People should be allowed to freely question their identities and land wherever they land eventually and change their minds, because that's what all non-famous people get to do as well.
Yeah. Okay, so talking again about social media, and if we look at sort of where it was 10 years ago when all we had was Facebook and maybe Tumblr, and now there seems to be like a new app every other month. So how do we think social media has evolved when it comes to sort of sex dating relationships and how it's changed over the last 10 years? Because I think we all were on maybe the early days, and we've seen that progression. So we're not like 15-year-olds who only know Instagram. We were in the golden age of Facebook and Tumblr. How do we think they've come in the good and the bad?
As I said, I do feel like they're trying. I think they are making progress. I think there are more platforms available for like the sex educators, which is good, which is healthy. I just think it just goes back to the issue around that blanket ban on sex content, maybe because years ago of what happened, and you'll get people sending inappropriate material, etc. But now this blanket ban is causing an issue for people that actually want to give that information out to people. And I think people who are qualified, experienced in sex education, there should be a way that you, I don't know, maybe go through some sort of accreditation system on social media where I know we've got the blue tick for for verified for verification on Instagram, but if there was, I don't know, a red tick, I mean, red's my favorite color, so I don't know, like a red tick or something to show that you've kind of met the standards and you are, qualified, experienced, whatever, to give information out on.
That's actually not a bad idea, because with a blue tick, it just verifies you to say that you are who you say you are.
Right.
But maybe if they had maybe another tick system, like you said, maybe like a red tick, to say this person is a qualified person within the field that they're claiming to be.
Yeah.
Do you think that might be a good thing that they can implement?
Yeah,
I think that's how the tick should be seen anyway.
Yeah.
Think of every other field under the sun that will now be like, I want the tick specifically for my thing.
Yeah. But I think maybe specifically for health, maybe if we just stick it to like health, do you think that could work?
Yeah, mental health, physical health.
So you'd have to have that tick in order to give any advice out to do with.
Yeah, and I think it would then mean that people who are just interested in talking about sex but don't actually have, any research behind, their advice, it means that they then just can't send information out on social media platforms.
And then at least people can know from their profile, okay, yeah, I can, because in theory, anyone can talk about sex and their experience. There's nothing wrong with that. But in terms of like getting proper information and like advice and guidance, then that could be
And then
something.
you'd hear young people say things like, hey, I went on social media and the lady, the man, the person had the red tick, so they were verified, and I found out this. And they can be sure then that the information that they found out is healthy and accurate information. I feel like I'm onto something here.
I know. Charlene, let's copyright this, please.
When this goes out, can we make sure that we know that I said this?
Charlene Douglas said it, guys. You heard it here on Comment on Top. And do we think social media has given people sort of the freedom to express their sexuality and be more open, or has it just sort of scared people in a way? Because actually, statistically, men are having less sex. And actually young people, because there's this preconceived idea that young people are just going around sleeping with anything that moves. But actually young people are having less sex now than they were 10, 15 years ago. But there's so much sexual content. So is that a good thing? Is it that they're learning and saying, actually, I'm willing to wait, or I don't want to get involved in that? And, there's so much more, I'd say, aware of general health and well-being, and like they're a lot more switched on with looking after themselves, sort of mentally, physically, emotionally. So do we think that social media has played a part in that? Do we think it's sort of taught people in a good way that actually you don't have to do, or what do we think of that?
I don't know if it's just social media. I think that is good public health and sex education working where people have been able to access it, because young people who've had comprehensive sexuality education are more likely to delay their first sexual experience till when they are ready.
Yeah.
That's what we want. Because it's not about an arbitrary sort of year. Some people think, I've done it too soon, or I wish I'd done it earlier. And it's like, well, it's up to all of us. As long as you're past the age of consent, do it. Do it when you like and when you're ready. So I think there's that. But when I've tried to read into what researchers hypothesize around the fact that young people are having less sex than older demographics, or starting later, another thing is that the friggin' economy sex in this economy, living with mum and dad or living with whoever cares for you, being able to not only have independence, but independent income and money to go and see people and do fun things, go on a date.
Yeah.
I'm not surprised that fewer of us feel like we can have access to that kind of stuff. And then all feeling pressurized as well to sort of go to uni and then do masters, and then it can just sort of go on and on and on.
Yeah.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
And I think it's quite important that that's normalized and recognized that, you may be watching American Pie, and American Pie was made in another era. This desperation of having sex before going to college or university. And actually stories like that are pretty old school now. The world looks very, very different for us.
Right.
And you can prioritize your sexual health and well-being without needing to constantly have sex.
Right.
And that's a message that I never got growing up, and I wish I did.
Yeah. Great, guys. So let's end with a quick quiz question, courtesy of our very own audience. Okay? So here it is. Yep. We asked our audience, does social media make it easier to get the ick? How many people said yes? Now, the closest person to the answer comes out on top. So,
no pun intended. Right?
No pun intended. So I'm going to start with you, Charlene. So how many people do you think on social media said that social media gives you the ick, is more likely to give you the ick?
Are we talking from percentage point of view?
Percentage point.
45%?
45%? Okay. Yeah. And Sophia?
Yeah.
I'm thinking people like social media researching someone that they think they fancy, finding out more intel. I am going to be more optimistic. I think it's 28%.
28%. Okay, so the person who has come out on top today is Charlene. So the answer is 59%. What? I know. Yeah, it was quite high. But to be honest, I personally wasn't surprised by that percentage because like you said, Sophia, that's what we do now. Before you even go on a date, the first thing you're going to do is check their Instagram.
Yeah.
Go through 52 weeks ago. And he's like, I don't like that shirt he wore in my youth.
I think I just give people, I think when I internet stalk people, I just give them the benefit of the doubt, clearly. I'm not one of these 59%ers. I think I'm just like, that's weird. Okay. Move
on. I think it's easier, like if you've met them in person and you're like, right, I can verify your height, that I'm attracted to you. Yeah, you can go in their social media. Might be a little bit off, but at least you've met them in person, so you know you like them. But when it comes to dating apps, a lot of people meet on, and not even just your traditional Tinders and Bumbles and all the rest of them, but even Instagram is like a dating app, really. It's like the unspoken rule, isn't it? Yeah. So a lot of people meet on Instagram, or you meet them and people don't even exchange numbers anymore. No. What's your Instagram? Yeah. So do you think that does affect, like, because now we're judging people based on their feed, and social media, especially Instagram, I say, because it is a visual picture app, that we are deciding based on a feed whether we like them or not. We're probably deciding in less than a minute.
Yeah, definitely. Because the thing is, like an online dating platform, you know that people have like strategically found pictures to make them look really good. Right. But on Instagram, it's like, let's see what you really look like. Yeah. Let's see what you're really about. Right. Right. So it's like it's close to an honest representation of what they look like.
Well, is it though? Well, because it's okay, and I think us girls are very guilty of it, I would say, for the most part. Yeah. But even talking about filters and things like that, because that does naturally, whether we like it or not, that does affect not only the way we see ourselves, but other people and what we expect other people to see us with. So things like filters. Do you think? Because I think at one point, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Instagram were talking about getting rid of filters. Hasn't happened yet, and I don't see
or having some kind of
disclaimer to say that. So do you think that would be a positive thing, especially for young people who are so easily influenced by other people's looks? And if you think about all the biggest celebrities or the women who are celebrated and put on a platform, they've all had all sorts of work done. All their Instagrams are like, we all know by now. We've seen the befores and afters. We've seen them when they've got a real pat picture compared to their Instagram feed. Yeah. Do you think that could be a positive step moving forward? Like having to declare that, look, I put 17 filters on this image.
Yeah. I think so. I mean, if we're talking about like helping particularly young people to
Right.
acknowledge like what is the truth and what isn't, then I think let's say that.
Yeah, I agree.
I always believe in the less social media polices, the better. And I think there should be more. Right, there are so many regulators and standards in place holding me to account as a journalist. If I were to do something, for example, falsify a photograph of something I'd borne witness to, these ethics are so inbuilt in us. We when we do our journalistic training, we have to demonstrate that we have thoroughly understood journalism ethics, media law. If you go online and you become a content creator or influencer, there is no training, there are no standards. And I would really like to see, it's really hard sort of expecting everyone to get something like that, but is there some kind of body that we can have? Because often when it comes to filters and things, that will normally be policed if an influencer has done an ad with it, and it'll be the advertising standards agency holding them to account. Otherwise, if you're not advertising anything,
You're free to express yourself the way you see fit.
you're free to sort of mislead people, and it's whether you are judged in this certain instance to be misleading someone via your content with filters, or whether you're using filters in an interesting artistic way and it's not about sort of misleading. So I think I would be very interested in seeing stuff get bulked out in that space rather than putting the onus on social media platforms who already can sort of in one moment change their mind and really impact the lives of content creators badly, as well. I think we should encourage content creators and influencers to hold themselves to account more and feel more responsibility. We keep coming back to that word today, but they need to feel more responsibility about what they're posting.
Ladies, I would like to thank you for coming on top. Charlene, you came on top today.
I came
Congratulations.
on top. Thank you.
Sophia, thank you for being an absolute darling and coming on the show today.
Oh, my pleasure.
Let our followers know where we can find you.
Everywhere. TikTok is where I have the most fun. So Sophia Smith Gaylor is my handle. And my book is available hopefully at any bookstore that you'd like to go to. Losing It, Dispelling the Sex Myths That Rule Our Lives.
Amazing. Charlene?
And I think probably the main platform will be Instagram. So you can find me at Charlene Douglas Official.
Amazing. Ladies, thank you once again. And don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. And of course, leave your review and tune in for the next episode for more juicy bits.